Valerie Hall stood frozen in the bustling lobby of Horizon Media Group, watching a distinguished elderly gentleman trying desperately to communicate with the receptionist. At 38, she was the oldest intern in the company's history, a fact that both embarrassed and motivated her. 6 months ago, she had walked away from 15 years in corporate finance to pursue her passion for communications and accessibility. Now, on this crisp Tuesday morning in October, she was supposed to be organizing presentation materials for a major client meeting. Instead, she found herself transfixed by a scene that stirred something deep within her. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't understand what you're trying to tell me," Jessica, the receptionist, was saying with barely concealed impatience. "Do you have an appointment? Can you write down who you're here to see?" The elderly man, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, with silver hair and an air of quiet dignity, was moving his hands in specific patterns. His eyes reflected a growing frustration as person after person walked past him, too consumed by their own urgent tasks to notice his struggle. Valerie recognized those hand movements immediately. They weren't random gestures. They were American Sign Language. Her heart squeezed with a familiar ache, the same feeling she experienced whenever she saw her brother Lucas being overlooked or dismissed because of his deafness. For most of her adult life, Valerie had maintained two separate worlds: her professional career, where she was known for her analytical mind and unwavering focus, and her personal life, where she was the fiercely protective sister of a deaf brother. She had learned ASL as a teenager when Lucas lost his hearing after a severe case of meningitis at age 9. What began as a necessity became a passion, and she had become fluent enough to serve as an informal interpreter for her brother throughout high school and college. Now, watching this elderly deaf man being treated as an inconvenience in the sleek, modern lobby of one of New York's most prestigious media companies made something shift inside her. The very company that prided itself on its diversity statements and inclusive marketing campaigns couldn't even properly accommodate a deaf visitor. Margaret Drake, Valerie's direct supervisor, had made it abundantly clear that morning that nothing, absolutely nothing, was to distract from the preparation for the Anderson Pharmaceuticals presentation. "This account could make or break our fourth quarter," Margaret had said, her voice clipped with tension. "I need those materials organized and ready in the conference room by noon. No exceptions." The rational part of Valerie's mind, the part that had survived 15 years in the cutthroat world of finance, screamed at her to turn around and get back to her assigned tasks. She was already on thin ice as an older intern trying to break into a new field. She couldn't afford any missteps. But then, the elderly man's shoulders slumped slightly, and Valerie saw defeat creeping into his posture. In that moment, she wasn't seeing a stranger in the Horizon Media Group lobby. She was seeing Lucas at 16, standing alone at his high school dance, while everyone around him carried on conversations he couldn't join. Before she could second-guess herself, Valerie was walking across the lobby, her heart pounding against her ribs. As she approached, the man looked up with weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from a lifetime of being misunderstood. Taking a deep breath, Valerie raised her hands and signed, "Hello, my name is Valerie. Can I help you?" The transformation in his face was instantaneous and profound. His eyes widened with surprise and relief, and a genuine smile spread across his features. His hands moved with the graceful efficiency of someone who had been using ASL for decades. "You sign," he responded. "Thank goodness. I was beginning to think no one here would understand me." "I'm sorry you've been having trouble," Valerie signed back. "What can I help you with?" "I'm here to see my son," he explained, his fingers forming the words with dignity. "But I'm not sure how to reach him. I don't have an appointment, and the young woman at the desk seems very busy." "What's your son's name?" Valerie asked. "I can help you find him." The man hesitated, and something complicated passed across his face, a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "James Caldwell," he signed finally. Valerie's stomach dropped. James Caldwell, the CEO of Horizon Media Group, the man whose name adorned the building directory, the executive whose rare appearances on the main floor caused ripples of nervous energy throughout the staff, the person who had final say over which interns were offered permanent positions. "Mr. Caldwell is your son?" Valerie signed, trying to mask her surprise. "Yes," he confirmed with a small nod. "I know he's very busy, but I was in the neighborhood and thought perhaps, well, I thought I might see him for just a few minutes." In that moment, Valerie saw vulnerability beneath the man's dignified exterior. This wasn't just a visitor. This was a father hoping to see his son. And something in his expression suggested this wasn't a regular occurrence. "My name is Victor," he added, spelling it out with his fingers. "Victor Caldwell." "It's nice to meet you, Victor," Valerie signed. "Let me see what I can do. Would you like to sit down while I make some calls?" She guided him to the seating area in the lobby, making sure they were positioned so they could maintain eye contact. As she pulled out her phone to call the executive floor, Valerie caught sight of Margaret staring at her from across the lobby, her expression a thundercloud of disapproval. For a fleeting second, Valerie considered abandoning her mission. This internship was her fresh start, her chance to rebuild a career doing something meaningful after years of feeling spiritually empty in finance. Was she really going to jeopardize it all for a stranger? Then she thought of Lucas, of all the times the world had been inaccessible to him, of all the people who had walked past him rather than making the effort to communicate. She thought of the company's glossy diversity statements that adorned the walls, promising inclusion for all. She thought of the disconnect between those stated values and what she was witnessing. Squaring her shoulders, Valerie dialed the extension for the executive suite. "Mr. Caldwell's office, this is Eleanor Kincaid speaking." The voice that answered was polished and professional, with the subtle frost that came from years of guarding access to powerful people. "Good morning, Ms. Kincaid. This is Valerie Hall from the Marketing Internship Program. I have a visitor in the lobby who says he's Mr. Caldwell's father, and he'd like to see him if possible." There was a long pause. "His father?" "Yes, an elderly gentleman named Victor Caldwell. He's been waiting in the lobby." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll need to check with Mr. Caldwell. Can you have the visitor wait?" "Of course. Thank you." Valerie hung up and returned to Victor. "His assistant is checking if he's available," she signed. "We may need to wait a bit." Victor nodded with resignation, as if this response was exactly what he'd expected. "Thank you for trying," he signed. "It's more than anyone else did." As they waited, Valerie found herself engaged in conversation with Victor Caldwell. He asked about her job at Horizon, and she explained that she was an intern transitioning from a career in finance. "That takes courage," he signed, his expression thoughtful. "Starting over isn't easy." "It's been challenging," Valerie admitted, "but necessary. I reached a point where I couldn't ignore that I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life." Victor smiled. "What made you learn sign language so well? Most hearing people don't bother." "My brother Lucas is deaf," Valerie explained. "He lost his hearing when he was 9, and I was 16. Our parents struggled with signing, but I threw myself into learning it. I wanted to make sure he never felt isolated in his own family." Victor's eyes softened. "Your brother is fortunate to have you. Being deaf in a hearing world can be lonely." The honesty in his expression touched something in Valerie. "May I ask, did James grow up signing with you?" A shadow crossed Victor's face. "He did once. His mother, my late wife, was a teacher at a school for the deaf. James was fluent by the time he was 5. Victor's hands slowed as he continued. "After she died, when James was in college, things changed. He became determined to succeed in the hearing world. Over time, he signed less and less." Valerie could see the pain beneath Victor's careful composure. This wasn't just about a father dropping in to see his busy son. This was about a relationship that had slowly fractured along the fault line between the deaf and hearing worlds. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Eleanor called back to say that James was in back-to-back meetings and wouldn't be available for at least another hour. Valerie could see the disappointment in Victor's eyes, though he tried to hide it. "Perhaps I should come back another time," he signed. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother," Valerie assured him. "Would you like to wait a little longer? I could show you around the building if you'd like. We have some beautiful work displayed on the upper floors." Victor's face brightened. "I would love that. I've never seen where James works." Tate. And so began what would later be described in Valerie's performance review as the most unauthorized building tour in Horizon Media Group history. Valerie knew she should be organizing presentation materials. She knew Margaret would be furious. She knew this could cost her the internship she had worked so hard to secure. But as she watched Victor Caldwell's face light up at the prospect of seeing his son's world, none of that seemed to matter quite as much as doing what was right. What she couldn't possibly know was that this decision, made in a moment of compassion, would fundamentally alter the course of her new career, and in ways she could never have anticipated. As Valerie led Victor through the building, she was acutely aware of two things: the joy spreading across his face as he explored his son's professional world, and the growing number of text messages from Margaret lighting up her phone. Each vibration felt like a nail in the coffin of her fledgling career in communications. "This is our creative department," Valerie signed, guiding Victor into a large open space filled with designers and copywriters hunched over sleek computers. The walls were adorned with award-winning campaigns and inspirational quotes about innovation. They developed the visual and written content for all our major clients. Victor moved through the space with the practiced eye of someone who understood design. "The architecture is impressive," he signed. "These sight lines and the natural light. Very thoughtful." "You have an eye for it," Valerie observed. "I was an architect for 40 years, Victor signed, his movements carrying a hint of pride. "I designed several buildings in the downtown area, including the Riverside Arts Center." Valerie's eyes widened. The Riverside Arts Center was one of the city's most celebrated modern buildings, known for its innovative accessibility features. "That's incredible," she signed. "I attended a conference there last year. The acoustics were perfect, and the visual alarms were integrated so beautifully into the design." "Accessibility should never be an afterthought," Victor signed. "It should be woven into the fabric of the structure." There was a quiet passion in his expression that resonated with Valerie. As they continued the tour, Valerie introduced Victor to colleagues who were receptive, translating conversations and helping him engage with James's world. Most employees were polite but brief, clearly busy with their own pressing tasks. A few, however, showed genuine interest, especially when Valerie explained that Victor was an acclaimed architect and the father of their CEO. "I had no idea Mr. Caldwell's father was deaf," whispered Danielle from the design team after a brief conversation that Valerie had translated. "He never mentions his family." Throughout the tour, Valerie found herself drawn to Victor's perspectives. He didn't just observe the offices. He noticed details others missed: the way light played through the windows at different angles, how the acoustic panels were positioned, how the flow of the space either facilitated or hindered communication. "James has built something impressive," Victor signed as they examined a wall displaying the company's most successful campaigns. "I'm proud of him." But Valerie caught something else in his expression, a wistfulness that suggested pride was only part of what he felt. "What is it?" she asked gently. Victor's hands hesitated before forming the words. "I'm proud of him," he repeated. "I just wish I knew him better as an adult. When he was young, we were very close. But as he got older, especially after his mother died, he seemed to feel he needed to become someone different, someone who belonged entirely to the hearing world. I understand. That's where the opportunities were. But sometimes I think he believes my deafness made me fragile, that he needed to protect me from his struggles. In trying to spare me difficulty, he stopped sharing his life with me." Valerie's heart ached for both of them. For Victor, who clearly loved his son deeply but felt shut out of his life, and for James, who had probably been trying to be strong and independent, but had inadvertently created distance between them. As they approached the marketing department where Valerie was supposed to be working, she finally checked her phone. 14 messages from Margaret, each more urgent than the last. The most recent simply read, "Where are you? Client presentation in 45 minutes. Materials incomplete. Career implications." Valerie felt her stomach twist. She had completely lost track of time. And now, the Anderson Pharmaceuticals presentation, the one Margaret had stressed was critical to the company's fourth quarter, was in jeopardy. "Is everything all right?" Victor signed, noticing her expression. Valerie hesitated before responding. "I should have been preparing materials for an important client meeting," she admitted. "My supervisor is concerned." Understanding dawned in Victor's eyes. "You've been helping me instead of doing your job," he signed, distress evident in his movements. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get you in trouble. You should go immediately." "It's not your fault," Valerie assured him. "I made the choice, and I don't regret it." Even as she said it, she realized it was true. Whatever the professional consequences, she couldn't regret treating Victor with the dignity and respect he deserved. "At least let me wait on my own now," Victor insisted. "I can sit in the lobby until James is available." Valerie was about to agree when she spotted something that made her blood freeze. James Caldwell himself was standing on the mezzanine level that overlooked the main floor, partially obscured by a column. He was watching them, watching his father interact with his employees, watching Valerie translate conversations and facilitate connections. From this distance, she couldn't discern his expression clearly, but his posture suggested he'd been there for some time. "I think your son might be available now," Valerie signed, her hands trembling slightly as she nodded toward the mezzanine. Victor turned, his eyes searching until they found James. A complex mixture of emotions crossed his face: hope, nervousness, and a deep, abiding love that was unmistakable even from across the room. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other across the distance. Then, James disappeared from view. "Perhaps he's coming down," Valerie suggested, trying to sound reassuring despite her own rising anxiety. If James had been watching them, he had also been witnessing her neglect of her assigned duties. She was probably about to be fired, and she had possibly created trouble for Victor as well. They made their way back to the lobby, where Margaret was waiting with an expression that could have curdled milk. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her foot tapped an impatient rhythm against the polished floor. "Valerie," Margaret said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "A word. Now." Before Valerie could respond, the elevator doors opened, and James Caldwell stepped into the lobby. In person, he was taller than Valerie had expected, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with the same silver-streaked dark hair as his father, and an air of quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Valerie's monthly rent, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. The same intelligent, observant eyes as Victor's, though with a guarded quality his father's lacked. The lobby fell oddly quiet as James crossed the space, employees suddenly finding reasons to slow their pace and observe this rare appearance of their CEO on the main floor. "Miss Hall," James said, his voice measured and controlled, "I understand you've been giving my father a tour of our facilities." Valerie swallowed hard, acutely aware of Margaret's thunderous expression beside her. "Yes, sir. Mr. Caldwell was waiting to see you, and since your assistant said you were in meetings, I thought he might enjoy seeing the company while he waited." James turned to his father, and what happened next made Valerie's heart skip a beat. He began to sign, not with the fluid grace of someone who used ASL daily, but with the careful, deliberate movements of someone who once knew the language well and was now reaching back through years of disuse. "Dad," he signed, his movements becoming more confident with each word. "I'm sorry I kept you waiting. I didn't know you were here until—" He paused, glancing at Valerie, then continued signing. "Until I saw you with Miss Hall. I've been watching you two." I haven't seen you look that happy in years." Victor's face transformed with surprise and joy. "You're signing," he responded, his own movements quick and natural. "I'm trying," James admitted, his hands moving more smoothly now. "I should have kept it up. I should have made more effort to communicate with you in your language, instead of always expecting you to adapt to mine." Father and son embraced then, right there in the middle of the busy lobby. Valerie felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched years of distance begin to melt away in that simple human connection. When they separated, James turned back to Valerie, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hall, I'd like to speak with you in my office. There are some matters I'd like to discuss." Margaret stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Caldwell, I should explain about Miss Hall's absence from her duties today. She was specifically assigned to the Anderson Pharmaceuticals presentation, which is now—" "I'm aware of the situation, Margaret," James interrupted, his tone polite but firm. "I'll handle this personally. Please ensure the Anderson materials are ready for the presentation. Miss Hall will be with me." Margaret's mouth opened and closed without sound before she managed a tight, "Yes, sir," and hurried away, casting one last inscrutable glance at Valerie. The executive elevator ride to the top floor was excruciating. Valerie stood beside James and Victor, her mind racing through every possible outcome of this meeting. Would she be fired immediately? Would she be asked to resign quietly? Would this setback derail her entire career transition? James's office occupied the northeast corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The space was immaculately decorated in subtle grays and blues, with sleek modern furniture and walls adorned with awards and artistic photographs documenting the company's most successful campaigns. "Please, sit," James said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. Victor and Valerie sat down, and to Valerie's surprise, James took the chair next to his father, rather than the imposing one behind his desk. "Miss Hall," James began, his expression softening slightly, "I believe I owe you both an apology and an explanation." Valerie blinked in confusion. "An apology, sir?" "Yes," James confirmed. "My father has visited this office exactly 4 times in the 8 years since I became CEO. Each time," he paused, glancing at Victor with a mix of regret and affection, "each time, he's been treated as an inconvenience, a disruption to the important work happening here. And each time, I've watched from a distance as my own employees made him feel unwelcome in his own son's workplace." Victor reached over and touched his son's arm, signing something Valerie couldn't quite catch. James nodded and continued. "Today was different. Today, I watched a 38-year-old intern, someone with no obligation to my father or to me, spend hours making him feel valued, respected, and included. I watched you translate conversations, facilitate connections, and treat him not as a burden or an obstacle, but as an honored guest." James's voice grew thick with emotion. "I watched you give him something I haven't given him in years, the feeling that he belongs in my world." Valerie felt tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Caldwell, I have a younger brother who's deaf, and I know how it feels when people ignore him or treat him like he's invisible. I couldn't stand to see that happen to your father. And that," James continued, his gaze intent on Valerie, "is exactly why I need to talk to you about your future here at Horizon Media Group." Valerie's heart sank. Despite his kind words, this was it, the gentle preamble before the termination. She straightened her spine, determined to accept the consequences of her choice with dignity. "I understand if you need to let me go," she said quietly. "I know I didn't do my assigned work today." James looked genuinely surprised. "Let you go?" He shook his head. "Miss Hall, I want to offer you a job. A real job, not an internship." Valerie stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry." "What? What I witnessed today showed me something that's been missing from this company," James said, leaning forward in his chair. "A genuine commitment to accessibility and inclusion. We have diversity statements on our walls and inclusion policies in our employee handbook, but we don't live it. We don't embody it. I want to change that, and I believe you could help me do it." Victor was beaming, signing rapidly to his son. James smiled and signed back, then turned to Valerie. "I'm creating a new position, Director of Accessibility Initiatives," he explained. "It would be your job to ensure that Horizon Media Group is truly accessible to everyone, employees, clients, and visitors. You'd develop training programs, create policies, and serve as an advocate for people who might otherwise be overlooked or excluded. You'd report directly to me." Valerie felt lightheaded. This couldn't be happening. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm just an intern. I don't have experience in human resources or policy development." "You have something more valuable than experience," James replied. "You have empathy and practical knowledge. You see people as individuals rather than inconveniences. And you have a skill set. Your fluency in ASL, your understanding of deaf culture through your brother, your corporate background from finance, that could transform how this company operates." He paused, studying her with those perceptive eyes. The position would come with a substantial salary, full benefits, and the authority to implement real change. Valerie looked at Victor, who was practically vibrating with excitement, then back to James. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," James suggested. "Take the weekend, but I hope you'll say yes. This company needs someone like you." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of details about the position, discussions of salary and benefits that made Valerie's head spin, and planning for the cultural changes that would need to happen throughout the organization. By the time she left James's office 2 hours later, her life had been completely upended. Victor hugged her goodbye, signing his thanks repeatedly. "You've given me back my son," he told her, "and you've given him something he didn't even know he was missing." James walked them to the elevator, and as the doors were closing, he said, "Miss Hall, Valerie, thank you for seeing him, for seeing what was important." The doors closed, leaving Valerie alone with the weight of everything that had just happened. She leaned against the elevator wall, trying to process the complete reversal of her fortune. This morning, she'd been a struggling intern trying to prove herself in a new field. Now, she was being offered a director-level position, reporting directly to the CEO. When the elevator doors opened on the main floor, Margaret was waiting, her expression a mixture of curiosity and residual annoyance. "What happened?" she demanded. "Are you fired?" "Because I had to completely redo the Anderson materials myself, and they're waiting in the conference room right now." Valerie took a deep breath. "I'm not fired. Actually, Mr. Caldwell offered me a position as Director of Accessibility Initiatives." Margaret's jaw dropped. "He what?" "I haven't accepted yet," Valerie said, finding her voice growing stronger. "I'm going to think about it over the weekend." Margaret stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "You're seriously considering turning it down? Do you have any idea how many people would kill for a director position reporting to James Caldwell?" "I understand the opportunity," Valerie replied, "but I want to make sure I'm the right person for the job." The truth was, despite the incredible offer, Valerie had reservations. Was this just an impulsive gesture from a CEO who felt guilty about his father? Would she actually have the support and resources to make meaningful changes? And was she really qualified to take on such a responsibility? Margaret was still staring at her. "Well, while you're considering your incredible luck, some of us have work to do. The Anderson team is waiting." Valerie nodded. "I'll head there now. I'd like to help if I can." "It's a bit late for that," Margaret snapped, but she didn't stop Valerie from following her to the conference room. The Anderson Pharmaceuticals presentation went surprisingly well, with Valerie contributing insights from her financial background that seemed to impress the clients. Margaret gave her a grudging nod of appreciation as the meeting concluded. After work, Valerie called her brother Lucas. They video chatted regularly, with Valerie signing and Lucas responding in a combination of signs and the limited speech he'd retained after losing his hearing. "You should take the job," Lucas signed emphatically, after Valerie had explained everything that had happened. "This is exactly what you've been talking about wanting to do, making a difference for people like me. But I don't have experience in this kind of role." Valerie signed back. "What if I fail? What if you succeed?" Lucas countered. "What if you create a workplace where a deaf person like me could actually thrive, where people don't automatically assume we're less capable?" His words resonated with Valerie. Throughout his life, Lucas had faced countless barriers, not because of his deafness itself, but because the world wasn't designed with people like him in mind. How many talented deaf individuals never got the chance to showcase their abilities because companies couldn't imagine how to accommodate them? The weekend passed in a whirlwind of reflection. Valerie made lists of pros and cons, consulted with friends, and spent hours researching corporate accessibility initiatives. By Sunday evening, she had made her decision. Monday morning found her standing outside James Caldwell's office, heart pounding as Eleanor announced her arrival. "Come in, Valerie," James called, using her first name with a warmth that hadn't been present in their first meeting. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. When he turned to face her, Valerie was struck by how much more relaxed he seemed, as if some internal tension had eased. "I've thought about your offer," Valerie said, getting straight to the point. "I'd like to accept the position, but with one condition." James raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued rather than offended. "What's your condition?" "I want to finish my internship first, as an actual intern," Valerie explained. "I need to understand this company from the ground up before I can effectively advocate for change. I want to experience the barriers firsthand, see where the pain points are, and build relationships with people at every level. Then, in 3 months, when my internship would have ended anyway, I'll step into the director role." James studied her thoughtfully. "That's not what I expected. Most people would jump at the promotion immediately." "I'm not most people," Valerie replied with a small smile. "And if you want me to help make Horizon truly inclusive, I need to do this right." A slow smile spread across James's face. "You know, my father said you reminded him of my mother. She never took shortcuts either." He extended his hand. 3 more months as an intern, then Director of Accessibility Initiatives. "We have a deal, Miss Hall." The next 3 months were a revelation. Knowing that her future role was secure, Valerie was able to observe Horizon with new eyes. She volunteered for projects across different departments, noting accessibility issues in everything from the company's internal communication systems to its client presentations. She documented the physical barriers in the building, the digital barriers in the company's software, and the attitudinal barriers among certain staff members. She also began building allies. To her surprise, Margaret became one of her strongest supporters after Valerie helped her create accessible marketing materials for a client with vision impairments, materials that ultimately won the company new business. "I've been thinking about that day," Margaret told her after a successful presentation. "I was so focused on the tasks, on what seemed urgent, that I completely missed what was actually important. I don't want to make that mistake again." James invited Valerie to weekly meetings to discuss her observations and begin planning the initiatives she would implement once she officially took the director position. To her delight, Victor often joined these meetings, offering insights from his years of experience designing accessible spaces. Through Victor, Valerie also learned more about James and the complex relationship between father and son. After his mother died, Victor explained one day as they waited for James to join them, James felt he had to be the strong one. He was only 22, but he took on the responsibility of taking care of me, even though I never asked him to. He pushed himself so hard to succeed in the hearing world, to prove that having a deaf father hadn't held him back. And in the process, he lost his connection to you, Valerie observed. Victor nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. We both lost something, but now, thanks to you, we have a chance to find it again. Indeed, Valerie had noticed the change in James over the weeks. He had begun practicing his signing regularly, joining Valerie and Victor for lunch every Friday, to immerse himself in ASL conversation. He spoke more openly about his father in meetings, sometimes sharing how Victor's perspective as a deaf architect had shaped his own approach to problem-solving. The most profound change came unexpectedly during a company-wide meeting in November. James was presenting Horizon's fourth-quarter goals when he suddenly switched from speaking to signing, with Valerie interpreting his words for the hearing staff. The message was clear. Accessibility wasn't just a project or an initiative. It was going to be part of the company's DNA moving forward. As the 3-month mark of Valerie's internship approached, she felt a growing excitement about the work ahead. She had compiled a comprehensive report on Horizon's accessibility challenges and opportunities, complete with a phased implementation plan that would transform the company over the next 2 years. What she didn't know was that James had plans of his own, plans that would take her vision for inclusion even further than she had imagined. The day before Valerie was set to officially transition to her new role, James called her into his office. Victor was there, along with Eleanor and several members of the executive team. On the conference table lay architectural drawings that Valerie didn't recognize. "What's all this?" she asked, looking from James to Victor in confusion. "These," James said with undisguised pride, "are the preliminary plans for the Horizon Accessibility Institute, a new division of Horizon Media Group dedicated to advancing accessible communication in corporate America." Victor stepped forward, his hands moving expressively as he signed. "James asked me to design it, a space that would be fully accessible from its foundation, not as an afterthought. And we want you to lead it," James added, "not just as a director within our company, but as the executive director of an institute that could change how businesses approach accessibility nationwide." Valerie stared at the plans, then at the faces around her. James with his newfound passion for inclusion, Victor with his architect's vision for accessible spaces, the executive team with their tentative but growing commitment to change. This was so much bigger than anything she had imagined when she'd stood up for a deaf visitor in the lobby 3 months ago. It was an opportunity to transform not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to inclusion. 6 months later, on a crisp April morning, Valerie stood at the podium in the newly renovated conference center at Horizon Media Group's headquarters. Before her sat representatives from over 50 major corporations, all gathered for the inaugural Summit on Corporate Accessibility. The event marked the official launch of the Horizon Accessibility Institute, and Valerie, as its executive director, was delivering the opening address. "Accessibility isn't charity," she told the assembled executives, her voice steady with conviction. "It's good business. When we create truly inclusive environments, we don't just comply with laws or fulfill obligations. We unlock human potential. We gain access to talent, perspectives, and innovations that would otherwise remain untapped." From the front row, Victor Caldwell watched her with undisguised pride. Beside him sat James, who was discreetly signing key points of Valerie's speech to his father, a habit he had developed over the past months as his ASL fluency returned. The gesture was small but meaningful, a CEO ensuring his father could fully participate in this milestone moment. The journey to this day had been intense and challenging. After accepting the position as executive director of the Institute, Valerie had thrown herself into creating an organization that would serve as both a model of accessibility and a resource for companies seeking to become more inclusive. The renovation of the Institute's physical space, occupying the entire 14th floor of the Horizon building, had been Victor's domain. Working with a team of architects that included deaf and disabled consultants, he had designed an environment that seamlessly integrated accessibility features, visual alert systems, optimal acoustics, tactile navigation aids, and flexible workspaces that could adapt to various needs. The best accessibility features, Victor had explained to the design team, are the ones you don't even notice unless you need them. James had surprised everyone with his wholehearted commitment to the project. The CEO, who had once been known for his laser focus on the bottom line, now spoke passionately about inclusion in board meetings and industry events. He allocated substantial resources to the institute and made himself personally available to meet with executives from other companies who were hesitant about investing in accessibility. But it was Valerie who had truly transformed, growing into her leadership role with a confidence that amazed even herself. The woman who had once felt like an out-of-place intern now commanded respect throughout the organization and the industry. Her unique combination of corporate experience, personal connection to the deaf community, and genuine empathy made her the perfect bridge between the business world and the disability community. As she concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Valerie reflected on the unexpected path that had led her here. One simple choice, to acknowledge a stranger's dignity, had cascaded into changes she could never have predicted. After the opening session, Valerie navigated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions from interested executives. She was making her way toward Victor and James when she spotted a familiar face that made her stop in her tracks. Margaret Drake, her former supervisor, was deep in conversation with the CEO of a major advertising agency. To Valerie's surprise, Margaret was signing as she spoke, her movements still somewhat halting but clearly understandable. "Margaret," Valerie greeted her, genuinely pleased to see her former boss. "I didn't know you were attending today." Margaret turned with a smile that contained none of the frostiness Valerie remembered from her intern days. "I wouldn't miss it, especially since 3 of my team members are presenting the workshop on accessible marketing materials." "You're signing?" Valerie observed, unable to hide her surprise. "I've been taking classes twice a week," Margaret admitted. "After everything that happened with you and Victor, well, it made me realize I was part of the problem. And I don't want to be that person anymore." Before Valerie could respond, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with Lucas, her brother, who had flown in from Seattle specifically for the summit. "You were amazing," Lucas signed, his face radiant with pride. "I knew you could do this." Valerie introduced Lucas to Margaret, who carefully signed a greeting to him. The moment was surreal. Her brother and her former supervisor conversing in sign language at an event dedicated to making the corporate world more accessible to people like Lucas. Later that afternoon, during a break between sessions, Valerie found herself alone with James in his office. The CEO looked tired, but satisfied, as he gazed out at the city skyline. "My father told me something interesting yesterday," James said, turning to face her. "He said that the day you found him in the lobby was actually the 3rd time he'd tried to visit me." Valerie's eyes widened. "The 3rd time?" James nodded, a shadow crossing his face. Apparently, he had come twice before in the previous year. Both times he was unable to communicate with reception and eventually left without seeing me. "I never even knew he was there." The thought of Victor standing alone in that lobby, unable to reach his son, then quietly leaving without anyone noticing, made Valerie's heart ache. "I'm so sorry, James." "Don't be," he replied. "It's not your fault. It's the system we created. A system that allowed people to be invisible if they didn't communicate in the right way." He shook his head. "What haunts me is thinking about all the other Victor Caldwells out there. Talented, valuable people who are shut out because we can't be bothered to make space for them. That's why we built the Institute," Valerie reminded him gently. "To change that system, one company at a time." James smiled, the weariness in his expression giving way to determination. "And we're just getting started." Indeed, they were. The summit was just the beginning of the Institute's work. In the coming months, Valerie would lead a team that developed accessibility certification programs for corporations, conducted workshops on inclusive communication, and created resources for businesses seeking to hire and retain deaf and disabled employees. The most rewarding aspect of her work, however, was witnessing the cultural shift happening within Horizon itself. What had begun with one intern noticing one visitor had spread throughout the organization like ripples in a pond. The marketing department now routinely created accessible versions of all client materials. The HR team had revised their hiring practices to be more inclusive of deaf and disabled candidates. The reception area had been redesigned to include visual displays, and all front desk staff received basic training in ASL. Even the company's approach to client relationships had evolved. Horizon now actively sought out partnerships with organizations led by or serving people with disabilities, accounts that would once have been considered too small or niche to pursue. One Tuesday in November, almost exactly 1 year after Valerie had first spotted Victor in the lobby, she received a call that left her momentarily speechless. "The Halford Foundation wants to interview you," Eleanor informed her. "They're considering Horizon for their annual Inclusive Business Award." The Halford Foundation was the most prestigious organization recognizing corporate commitment to disability inclusion. Their annual award wasn't just an honor. It was a statement that a company had become a true leader in accessibility. When Valerie shared the news with James, his response surprised her. Instead of focusing on the positive press or potential business advantages, he simply said, "My father will be so proud." So, the transformation in their relationship had been one of the most profound outcomes of the past year. James and Victor now had lunch together every Friday, a standing tradition that was considered sacrosanct on the CEO's calendar. They attended architectural exhibitions together, with James proudly introducing his father to colleagues and associates. Victor had even begun consulting on some of Horizon's projects, bringing his expertise in accessible design to the company's client work. 2 weeks before the Halford interviews, Valerie was working late in her office at the Institute when she received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Kincaid appeared in her doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course," Valerie replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor sat down, her usual efficiency temporarily replaced by uncertainty. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "For what?" "For that day in the lobby, when you called about Victor waiting to see James." Eleanor's eyes held genuine regret. "I knew exactly who he was the moment you said his father. But I stalled. I made him wait unnecessarily." "Why?" Valerie asked gently. Eleanor sighed. "Because that's what I thought my job was, to protect James's time and attention, to shield him from distractions. I didn't stop to consider that some distractions might actually be important." She shook her head. "I was so focused on being a good gatekeeper that I forgot to be a good human being." Valerie reached across the desk and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You've more than made up for it since then. I've seen how you've championed the Institute's work." It was true. Over the past year, Eleanor had become one of the Institute's most vocal advocates within Horizon. She had reorganized James's entire scheduling system to prioritize accessibility-related initiatives and had taken it upon herself to ensure that all executive communications were available in accessible formats. "Thank you," Eleanor said, visibly relieved. "But there's something else I wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about the Halford interviews. They're going to ask about the catalyst for Horizon's transformation, and I believe they should hear the full story. Not just the corporate version, but the human one." "What do you mean?" Valerie asked. "I think Victor should be part of the interview," Eleanor explained. "His perspective, as both the person who was initially excluded and as someone who has been integral to our accessibility initiatives, would be powerful." Valerie smiled, already imagining how meaningful that would be for Victor. "That's a wonderful idea. I'll talk to James about it tomorrow." The next day, however, brought an unexpected development that temporarily pushed the Halford interviews from everyone's minds. James called an emergency meeting of the Institute's leadership team. When everyone was assembled in the conference room, he made an announcement that sent a ripple of concern through the group. "We've learned that Meridian Communications is launching their own accessibility division," he said, referring to Horizon's largest competitor. "They've hired Thomas Wheeler to lead it." Thomas Wheeler was a well-known figure in accessible technology, and someone the Institute had tried unsuccessfully to recruit months earlier. They're positioning themselves to compete directly with us in this space, James continued. Their first initiative will be an accessibility certification program for media companies, similar to what we've been developing. Valerie felt a flash of worry. Competition from a company like Meridian could potentially undermine the Institute's work before it had fully established itself. "What does this mean for us?" asked Derek from the certification team. James looked at Valerie, silently deferring to her leadership on this matter. It was a gesture of respect that still sometimes caught her by surprise. "It means," Valerie said after a thoughtful pause, "that our work is even more important than we realized. If major players like Meridian are entering this space, it confirms what we've been saying all along. Accessibility isn't just the right thing to do. It's a business imperative." She stood up, addressing the concerned faces around the table. "We won't change our approach because of competition. In fact, I believe this development can actually help our cause. When multiple companies invest in accessibility, it normalizes the concept. It moves inclusion from a nice-to-have to a must-have." Her words seemed to ease the tension in the room, but privately, Valerie knew they faced a significant challenge. Meridian had deeper pockets and a larger market share than Horizon. If this became a competition, the Institute might struggle to maintain its position as the thought leader in corporate accessibility. That evening, as Valerie mulled over the Meridian situation in her office, she was surprised by a visit from Victor. At 73, he remained remarkably energetic, still consulting on architectural projects, while serving as the Institute's most passionate ambassador. "James told me about Meridian," he signed, after settling into the chair across from her. "You seem worried." "A little," Valerie admitted, signing as she spoke, a habit she had developed to make conversations with Victor more natural. "Competition is healthy, but Meridian has resources we can't match." Victor considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Do you know why I became an architect?" he asked. When Valerie shook her head, he continued, "After I lost my hearing as a teenager, I became acutely aware of how spaces were designed without people like me in mind. Announcements I couldn't hear, emergency systems I couldn't detect, learning environments that shut me out because of their acoustics or layout." His hands moved with the eloquence that came from decades of signing. "I could have become bitter. Instead, I decided to create spaces where everyone belonged. Not by designing separate accommodations, but by reimagining spaces themselves. The best accessibility isn't an addition. It's built into the very foundation." Valerie nodded, understanding where he was going. "You think we need to reimagine our approach to the Institute?" "I think," Victor signed, his eyes twinkling, "that competition from Meridian is exactly what we need to push us to be bolder, to move beyond incremental changes and create something truly transformative." As always, Victor's perspective shifted something in Valerie's thinking. She had been viewing Meridian's entry into the accessibility space as a threat. What if, instead, it was an opportunity to elevate their work even further? The Halford Foundation's evaluators arrived at Horizon Media Group on a Monday morning in early December. Snow was falling gently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a picturesque backdrop for what would become one of the most significant days in the company's history. Valerie had spent the weekend meticulously preparing for the interviews, reviewing the Institute's achievements over the past year, and organizing testimonials from employees and clients who had benefited from their accessibility initiatives. But what made this presentation truly special was the approach they had decided to take. Instead of the standard corporate presentation highlighting metrics and milestones, Valerie, James, and Victor had designed an immersive experience that would allow the evaluators to understand accessibility from multiple perspectives. "Welcome to Horizon!" Valerie greeted the three-person evaluation team in the newly redesigned lobby. "Before we begin, I'd like to offer you a choice for how you experience our company today." She presented them with three options. They could tour Horizon as a deaf visitor, as someone with low vision, or as a person with mobility limitations. Each experience would be guided by an employee who actually lived with that disability, giving the evaluators authentic insight into how Horizon's accessibility features functioned in real-world scenarios. "This is unexpected," said Dr. Elaine Chen, the lead evaluator. "Most companies show us their policies and procedures. You're asking us to actually experience them." "Exactly," James responded. "Because accessibility isn't about what looks good on paper. It's about how people actually experience our spaces, our communications, and our culture." The evaluators exchanged impressed glances and opted to split up, each taking a different experience path. For the next 2 hours, they were guided through Horizon's offices, experiencing firsthand how the company had transformed itself. Chen, who chose the deaf visitor experience, was paired with Marcus, a deaf graphic designer who had joined Horizon 4 months earlier. With an interpreter facilitating communication, Marcus showed her how the company's visual alert systems, captioned videos, and ASL-fluent staff created an environment where he could fully participate. In the marketing department, she watched as a team meeting unfolded with interpreters present and presentation materials designed to be accessible without sound. She observed how team members had adapted their communication styles, facing speakers directly, ensuring only one person spoke at a time, and checking for understanding regularly. "Before I came to Horizon," Marcus signed, "I was the only deaf person at my previous company. I spent most of my time isolated or struggling to follow conversations. Here, I'm just another team member. The accommodations are so integrated that they don't feel like special treatment. They feel like the way things should be." The other evaluators had similarly revealing experiences. Jeffrey Williams, who toured as a person with low vision, was guided by Layla from the research department, who had retinitis pigmentosa. She demonstrated how Horizon had implemented high-contrast signage, tactile navigation aids, and digital documents designed to work seamlessly with screen readers. Michael Torres, experiencing Horizon as a person with mobility limitations, was paired with David from Client Services, who used a wheelchair. David showed him how the office layout had been redesigned to eliminate steps, reduce distances between common areas, and provide adjustable workstations that accommodated various physical needs. When the tours concluded, the evaluators gathered in the Institute's conference room for the final interview. They looked visibly moved by what they had experienced. "I have to say," Dr. Chen began, "in the 15 years I've been evaluating companies for the Halford Award, I've never experienced anything quite like this. You've clearly gone beyond compliance to create a genuinely inclusive environment." "Thank you," Valerie responded. "But what you've seen today isn't the result of any single initiative. It's the outcome of a fundamental shift in how we think about accessibility." She glanced at Victor, who was seated beside James. "And it all began with a moment of human connection that forced us to confront our own failures." Victor stepped forward then, and with Valerie interpreting, he shared the story that had started it all, his experience being ignored in the lobby, Valerie's simple act of acknowledging his dignity, and the remarkable chain of events that had followed. "For most of my life," he signed, his movements elegant and expressive, "I've been accustomed to being overlooked in the hearing world." What made Valerie's action so powerful wasn't just that she could sign. It was that she saw me as a person worth her time and attention, even at potential cost to herself. James added, "When I witnessed that interaction, I realized our company had been operating with a fundamental disconnect. We created campaigns about inclusion while failing to practice it in our own halls. We talked about diversity while allowing people like my father to feel unwelcome in our space." As the interview progressed, the evaluators asked challenging questions about Horizon's accessibility initiatives, particularly in light of Meridian Communications' recent entry into the space. "We don't see Meridian as a competitor in this arena," Valerie explained. "We see them as a partner in a larger movement. The more companies that commit to accessibility, the more normalized it becomes across industries. Our goal isn't to own corporate accessibility. It's to transform how businesses think about inclusion altogether. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and the evaluators seemed genuinely impressed by this perspective. Before they left, Dr. Chen asked one final question. If you could share one lesson from your journey with other companies, what would it be? Valerie looked at James and Victor, then back to the evaluators. That accessibility isn't a compliance issue or a charitable initiative. It's a business imperative and a human right. When we design our workplaces, our products, and our communications with everyone in mind, we don't just benefit those with disabilities. We create better experiences for everyone. 2 weeks later, Valerie was working in her office when her phone rang. It was James, his voice barely containing his excitement. "We won," he said simply. "The Halford Foundation just called. Horizon has been selected for this year's Inclusive Business Award." Valerie felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's incredible," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "There's more," James continued. Dr. Chen specifically mentioned that what set us apart wasn't just our accessibility features, but the cultural transformation we've undergone. She said it was clear that our commitment went beyond superficial changes to a fundamental reimagining of how a company can operate. The award ceremony was held in January at the Riverside Arts Center, Victor's architectural masterpiece. As Valerie stood on stage beside James and Victor to accept the award, she looked out at the audience filled with Horizon employees, clients, and representatives from other companies eager to learn from their example. James delivered a brief acceptance speech, and then, in a moment that brought tears to many eyes, he switched to signing, with Valerie voicing his words for the hearing audience. "This award belongs to every person at Horizon who has embraced our journey toward true inclusion," he signed, his movements now fluid and confident after months of practice. "But it especially belongs to two people. My father, Victor Caldwell, who never gave up on me even when I failed to make space for him in my world, and Valerie Hall, whose simple act of kindness revealed a better path forward for all of us." He turned to Valerie, switching back to spoken words. "Valerie, would you like to say something?" Stepping to the microphone, Valerie took a deep breath. "A year ago, I was a 38-year-old intern trying to start over in a new field. I had left a successful career in finance because I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference in the world. I never imagined that one small decision, to acknowledge someone's dignity when others wouldn't, would lead to this moment." She looked at Lucas, who was sitting in the front row, his face shining with pride. "I learned sign language for my brother because I couldn't bear the thought of him feeling isolated in his own family. But what began as an act of love for one person has grown into a mission that affects hundreds, potentially thousands of lives." Valerie paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "The truth is, the most profound change hasn't been in our policies or our physical spaces, though those matter enormously. The real transformation has been in how we see each other, in recognizing that accessibility isn't about accommodating them, it's about creating a world that works better for all of us." As applause filled the auditorium, Valerie caught sight of someone she hadn't expected to see. Thomas Wheeler from Meridian Communications, standing at the back of the room. He gave her a small nod of respect, and she nodded back, realizing that what she had told the Halford evaluators was true. This wasn't a competition. It was a movement, and it was growing. The celebration continued long into the evening, with Horizon employees from every department mingling with clients and industry leaders. Valerie found herself constantly in demand, fielding questions about the Institute's work and accepting congratulations from people eager to learn from Horizon's example. During a quiet moment, she slipped away to the terrace overlooking the city. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible above the urban glow. She was savoring the peaceful moment when she heard the door open behind her. It was Victor, his face flushed with happiness from the evening's events. He joined her at the railing, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment before he began to sign. "I've been thinking about that day in the lobby," he told her, about all the different choices that could have been made. If you had walked past me like everyone else, if James hadn't been watching, if you had prioritized your job over doing what was right, none of this would have happened. Valerie nodded, signing as she responded. I've thought about that too. How something so small can lead to something so significant. It wasn't small, Victor corrected her gently. That's what I've realized. When you acknowledge someone's humanity, truly see them when the rest of the world doesn't, that's never small. It's everything. The door opened again, and James joined them on the terrace. For a few moments, the three of them stood together, looking out at the city lights. The Institute has requests from 17 companies wanting to partner on accessibility initiatives, James said finally, breaking the silence, including 3 of our biggest competitors. And Meridian? Valerie asked. James smiled. Thomas Wheeler approached me tonight. He's proposing a joint conference on accessible media, Horizon and Meridian collaborating instead of competing. That's wonderful, Valerie said, genuinely pleased. The more voices amplifying this message, the better. We're going to need to expand, James continued. More staff, more resources, possibly even a dedicated building, eventually. He looked at his father. I was hoping you might consider coming out of retirement to consult on the design. Victor's face lit up. I would love that. As they continued discussing plans for the Institute's future, Valerie felt a profound sense of rightness. From a financial analyst to an intern to the executive director of a groundbreaking institute, her career path had been anything but conventional. Yet somehow, she had ended up exactly where she was meant to be. The following Monday, Valerie arrived at her office to find a small gift box on her desk. Inside was a beautiful pen engraved with the date she had first encountered Victor in the lobby, and a note from James that read simply, Some moments change everything. Thank you for this one. Later that morning, as she led a meeting with her growing team at the Institute, Valerie looked around the table at the diverse group of individuals who had come together for this work. There was Marcus, the deaf graphic designer, Layla with her expertise in accessible digital content, David bringing his perspective on physical accessibility, and several others, each contributing unique insights from their own experiences. This was what true inclusion looked like, Valerie realized. Not a special program or a charitable initiative, but a fundamental recognition that everyone belonged at the table, that every voice deserved to be heard, that every person had something valuable to contribute. As the meeting concluded, Valerie remained at the table, watching her team members discuss ideas with animation and purpose. She thought of Victor, standing alone in that lobby a year ago, of Lucas struggling to be seen in a world not designed for him, of all the people who had ever felt invisible or overlooked because they didn't fit the narrow definition of normal. The world was changing, not as quickly as she might wish, but changing nonetheless. And in her own small but significant way, she was helping to guide that change. One company, one policy, one moment of human connection at a time. Outside her office window, snow was beginning to fall again, transforming the city into something new and beautiful. Valerie smiled at the sight, thinking how appropriate it was. A perfect metaphor for the work they were doing. Change didn't always come in dramatic revolutions. Sometimes it came quietly, gradually, like snowflakes accumulating until suddenly you looked up and the entire landscape had been transformed. And it all began with a simple choice: to see someone who was being overlooked, to acknowledge their dignity, to make space for them in a world that too often rushed past without noticing. Sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to stop, to notice, to care. In that moment, Valerie Hall understood with perfect clarity that she hadn't just found a new career, she had found her purpose. And in a world that often felt divided and disconnected, that was the most precious gift of all. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.